Hey, folks, this is Mark Devine with the Unbeatable Mind podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Super stoked to have you on board. And we are going to have a terrific conversation with Mr. Dr. Sid Ellington, who's a good friend of mine, actually, a teammate from way back when at SEAL Team 3. But before I introduce Sid a little bit more in depth, once again, thanks for supporting the Unbeatable Mind podcast. It really helps if you rate the podcast so others can find it. We have over 1,000 5-star ratings on iTunes, but wherever you listen, helpful to rate it or share it with your friends. Just let them know that you hear some really interesting things here, and that's helpful. Also, if you like to watch the podcast, even though it's just a couple of people jawboning back and forth on a video at this point in time, we do have these on our YouTube channel, so Unbeatable Mind YouTube or Mark Devine YouTube, and you can find them at our website, unbeatablemindcom. All right. So, Sid, I'm super stoked to have you here. I've got Navy SEAL retired commander Sid Ellington. Spent 21 years in the Navy. Started out, interestingly enough, as a surface warfare officer, a boat driver, and then transitioned over to the SEALs. Many folks don't realize that a lot of officers in the naval special warfare community actually come from surface warfare or even the air community. I remember a bunch of pilots who had transitioned over. It's pretty cool. After retiring, Sid went on and got his PhD and then served as executive director of the Warrior School Project, which is a nonprofit providing educational services for military vets transitioning so they can get their college degrees. He also serves as a teacher in New Orleans in the Teach for America program and is director of Veterans Outreach in support of that Teach for America. He planned and spearheaded the Louisiana Department of Education's citywide truancy reduction program for New Orleans. I think, Sid, you're a powerful example of how veterans can continue to serve our country through a multitude of ways, but particularly through education and nonprofit initiatives. Most people think of, especially transitioning SEALs, as like picking up weapons and going and working for Blackwater or coming and working for SEALFIT. But you've charted a different path. And so I appreciate that. And then also, I will say, full disclosure, that I'm excited to have Sid join our Courage Foundation recently as executive director. So a huge boost for our leadership there. Sid, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and your service. So hoo-yah.
Hey, thanks for having me. Just like to send a shout out real quick and send out, prayers and thoughts for all the families that have been impacted by Hurricane Ida. That's right. Louisiana and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Those folks down there are dealing with a lot. And so, we're thinking.
I was thinking about that in terms of people who lived through Katrina now experiencing that. That must have brought up some serious post-traumatic stress issues or a lot of fear. And, hopefully I'm certain they're much more prepared, both in terms of resiliency, but also in terms of the actual infrastructure. But what's your take on like the resilience in the infrastructure and how people can handle this versus Katrina?
Well, I think the city as a whole is better able to handle it. They've reinforced the levees. The Corps of Engineers has done that, and so you didn't have flooding at all in New Orleans.
Oh, good.
It's the outlying areas. The water's got to go somewhere when you have that kind of storm surge. So folks like in Homa and Laplace, there's a lot of devastation, up there as well. Yeah, so what I experienced in my time with Teach for America, teaching in New Orleans, big rainstorm, you see kids really freaking out. There's definitely some scars from Katrina.
Yeah, and it's just for someone like me who hasn't lived through a devastating event like that, where your house gets completely swamped or ruined by mud or burned by a fire or blown away in a tornado, just the recovery has got to be torturous. You know what I mean? When everything's stripped away from you and you've got to start over like that.
Yeah, I can remember, everybody remembers Hurricane Katrina in the lower Ninth Ward, driving through 5 years after Katrina, and the lower Ninth Ward was still nowhere near a level of recovery that you would expect, over a 5-year period. It was just devastated.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, we'll send our healing energy to that area and anyone else suffering right now. We have the fires in California, and we've got this crazy situation in Afghanistan, which I want to come back to and talk about it through the lens of veterans. But let's kind of back um, back up in time a little bit. You're from Oklahoma. Now,
I am.
what is an Oklahoma boy doing in the Navy? And there's not a lot of water around there.
You
So
know,
how did you get to go to the Navy surface warfare, and then what
yeah. So
crossover?
you and I are about the same age, and um, I grew up thinking that my trajectory was, I was going to go into the Army and go to Vietnam. And Saigon fell when I was in junior high school, and suddenly I didn't have a plan anymore. So I just, as you get older and you read, I read They Were Expendable by William White, and thought PT boats were awesome, and decided I wanted to join the Navy. And so I
Did you have
went to
military
university.
in your family?
Pardon?
Was your
I,
family a military family?
yeah, my dad was in the Army cavalry in World War II.
No kidding.
No
Wow.
kidding. Yeah, so he fought in the Pacific.
Did he
I
actually
never
ride a
talked
horse?
about it.
Did he have a horse, or did they move on the horses by then?
They used horses, and part of his role as a young enlisted guy was he took care of the horses. But they didn't have mechanized, completely, mechanized equipment pullers. So they did use horses, and that was part of his job, was to take care of the horses.
That's incredible. That was literally only what, 80 years ago?
Something like, yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so you found yourself did you go, so you went to Oklahoma State, right?
Oklahoma,
Or
University of
University
Oklahoma.
of Oklahoma. So you got your college degree there. Did they have an ROTC program, or how did you
They did, and back in those days, interestingly, I being an Oklahoma boy from farm country, sitting in the armory there, my first ROTC class, just kind of an introductory, what do you want to do? Why are you in the Navy? And I want to go on a Spruance class destroyer. I want to fly F-14s. And these kids had all this technical knowledge. And when it came to my turn, Instructor Shaughnessy, Lieutenant Shaughnessy said, "And Midshipman Ellington, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to command a squad of PT boats." And the room erupted into laughter, and I didn't know why. And he says, "Well, I got to break it to you, there haven't been any PT boats in the inventory in a while since like the Korean War." So I had to come up with another plan, and that plan was to go through BUDS training. But back then in the 80s, going straight from ROTC to BUDS, there were like 4 or 5 billets for the entire country. So the path was, you go get your surface warfare, your warfare pen, and then apply. And so that's the route I followed. So I got orders to BUDS as a JG.
That's interesting. But you didn't have any guarantee. You had to go through surface warfare school. You had to get qualified as a surface or a SWO officer to earn your SWO pin, and then you had to apply to BUDS, right? It's not like you had some kind of guarantee.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then I had to apply.
Well, it's interesting. So you probably went into the Navy around 86 or 87?
85 was year group 85.
85. So I graduated college 85. I was a few years behind you. I went to SEAL training in late 89. No, I went to OCS late 89, November of 89, and then into BUDS in 90. But I had a similar situation, but it was even worse. There were only literally 2 that they took from OCS the year I applied.
Oh, wow.
And so I went Officer Candidate. I didn't have an ROTC program at Colgate or NYU, nor was I even thinking about it. But that's curious. When we were talking about that, I was thinking to myself, like SEALs or bust. Like they didn't offer me, oh, maybe you should go surface warfare, and then if you really want to be a SEAL, you can apply later on. I was like, I want to get a billet with a guarantee to be, to go to SEAL training after Officer Candidate School. And they had 2 of them in that regard that they gave out that year, and I got 1. But if I didn't get that, I'm really curious what I would have done, whether I would have backtracked and said, okay, I'll go SWO and then apply.
Yeah, it's, for me, it was surface. ROTC was set up for surface aviation and submarines. Right. So those were your 3 pipelines.
Right.
We would have a few that went into the supply corps, but but not many. It was mostly, those three warfare specialties is what
Right.
ROTC was structured around,
Right.
at least back in those days.
So it's always fun when I talk to SEAL teammates to get a glimpse of their SEAL training, of buds, and what were the highs and lows and crazy things or leadership lessons, one or two. We don't want to spend all day, but then let's talk about your operating career and then your administrative career. Let's kind of peel back the onion on what it was like to be a Navy SEAL for Commander Sid Ellington and Ensign Lieutenant J.G. Ellington,
But
Lieutenant Ellington, Lieutenant Commander
my
Ellington.
yeah, my first thoughts, being out on the grinder for the first time. I was a little bit older. Everybody else in the class was an ensign. Most of them, had come from the Naval Academy.
The other officers, you mean, in
The other officers, yeah, the other
most of the class were enlisted.
most of the class were enlisted. Thanks for the correction. Yeah, we started with 105 and wound up graduating 17 originals.
That's a pretty small class actually to start.
Yeah,
So we had 185 and we graduated 19.
Wow. They're going to get the numbers down below 20 somehow.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, but I can remember looking left and looking right, and some of these guys were just massive. And here I am, 5'6", and I think at the time I might have weighed 135 pounds. And I'm like, I'm with the wrong group of people. But the other thing I noticed is as training got started, some of those great big guys with all the muscles were the first ones to quit.
Right.
Maybe it's because they'd never done anything hard before.
Well, I think that's really interesting point, and that is surprising for a lot of people to hear, but that was my experience as well. And it's our experience also with SEALFIT. And I know you've experienced coaching a SEALFIT event. The more muscle mass you have, unless it's trained properly, right? If you've trained muscle mass through like hypertrophy, which is like bodybuilding, it does not serve you well in a training situation like buds. And those people end up getting rhabdomyolysis and really just burning out. They don't have the muscular stamina. So you got to have the right type of muscles if you're going to have muscles. And and you don't have to be a big burly dude. Like you said, you were part of one of the smaller guys, and some of the, the shorter guys were some of the best performers in my class. Right. And of course we anecdotally call them the Smurf crew, which I'm not sure would pass today's muster, but it was, they all took it in stride.
I was definitely in the Smurf crew, and got full benefit for being in the Smurf crew.
Right. So tell us about your ups and downs and buds. What were some of the biggest ahas and interesting leadership lessons?
Well, the great thing about buds is, they'll find your weakness, and then those instructors will dig and dig and dig and probe and probe and probe. I was not, real fast in the water, so I always struggled with, with the timed swims. I passed them all, but always just barely. I guess if the minimum passing time wasn't good enough, it wouldn't be the minimum. My strength was the O course. Did real well there. But it was Buds was a trial. And just being pushed every single day. But following, and seeing some of the best doggone leaders, that I'd ever seen up until that point. Certainly didn't see them in the surface Navy. I remember when we were doing the underwater swim, and some guys were struggling with it, and Ryan Zinke said, "Let me show you how this is done." Mm-hmm. And Ryan Zinke, of course, is a former congressman and Secretary of the Interior. Mm-hmm. I think he's running for the Senate now.
No, I just saw him.
Did you?
Sat next to him on the plane out to Wyoming. He was heading back to Montana. Yeah, no, he's running for the new congressional seat that opened up for Montana after the new census, and he's recruited five or six other SEALs to run for different congressional seats because he's not happy with what he sees going on in the in the politics. So he's jumping back into the ring with a bunch of other guys. So it'll be interesting to see how they fare next year.
Well, what I remember, and the thing that made such an impression on me is, he was on the edge of the pool, and he did a complete front flip, and landed into the water, and then swam 50 meters, and then, climbed out and said, that's how it's done. And, that was when I saw, for the first time, stuff that, you only read about in books and movies, and that is, leadership by example. Didn't see that so much, in the surface Navy as often. But that made a real impression on me that you got to do it. You can't just give the orders. And all of our instructors and buds were just phenomenal people.
Yeah.
And they didn't say go run 4 miles. They would lead you in a 4-mile run. And we also had a person from Bud's class 65 who had retired, and he did every open ocean swim with our class.
Really?
But there was a real, the leadership was more by, example. It was kind of the follow me mode, which really resonated with me as a young leader.
Right. No, I love that. That's kind of a hallmark of great leadership anywhere, but especially in the SEALs. So we kind of took it for granted.
Yeah.
Once we got kind of baked into that you had to lead by example, lead from the front, but doesn't mean you always have to take charge. You just have to demonstrate that you're willing to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And you're willing to be competent at all the skills. Like the enlisted guys didn't expect us officers or cake eaters to be the best at everything, but they expected us to not slow the team down, right? So we had to be out there doing the work.
And be willing to pitch in and help. And let somebody else be in charge for any particular evolution where they hold the expertise, being confident enough to do that.
That's right. Interesting. So what was the biggest challenge for you in SEAL training?
I think probably, once I got to SEAL Team 3, and that was before SQT and some of the stuff that we have in place now. So you were still in training. It was just advanced training. As you went through your pre-deployment training with your platoon, you weren't certified.
We didn't earn the Trident until 6 months after showing up at our SEAL team.
At least, yeah.
And we had to go through the whole PQS or personal qualification standards thing, all the interviews, learn all the advanced skills. So that was all replaced by what's now SQT. So currently BUDS is 9 months and you get your Trident when you're done. Back when you and I went through, BUDS was 6 months. Then we went to the team, we had 6 more months of training. And if you were ready, you got your Trident, but not all of us got our Tridents. Some people,
not everybody. Yeah. Usually, the goal was to, get everybody qualified, all the new guys in a platoon before deployment date rolled around. And the guys that needed some more time and hadn't qualified yet and hadn't earned their Trident, they rolled into another platoon. But what I found that was most difficult for me was the underwater, ship attacks, because I had been, a shipboard engineer and, had, understood how easy it would be to send a new guy, down below decks to secure all the sea suctions and have something missed. And
so you mean water getting sucked into the boat?
Getting sucked in.
So a Navy SEAL underneath a boat wanders up against one of these things and gets sucked in, and
you get sucked right into the intake. And there's a screen there, of course, but for the pumps, you're not going to be able to get off of it because those pumps are really, really huge. And when the ship,
did that ever happen to a SEAL team guy?
Not to a SEAL team guy that I know of. The big story that they were telling was a platoon doing ditch and dawn, which is where you take your dragger off, and then you do a free ascent up the side of the ship. And what you're trained to do is find a welding seam and follow that welding seam up to the surface.
Right. And otherwise, you don't really know what direction you're swimming because
you have no idea.
Pitch black. Yeah.
It's pitch black, and you don't realize how huge the bottom of a ship is, even a smaller ship.
Right.
And there was one individual, it happened probably maybe less than a year before I got to SEAL Team 3. He followed the wrong seam, and so he was going along the hull, not toward the surface, but from bow to stern.
Right.
And got shot a lot of blackout and drowned, as a result of it. And so there was a lot more precautions put in place, but the being underneath the ship just unnerved me. That was my Achilles heel. That was my fear.
God, You just brought up a memory of mine. Yeah, one of our biggest disasters when I was a platoon commander was a ship attack, ditch and don, or don and ditch, or whatever we called it. Same exact training evolution where, I don't know what you did, but we took limpet mine magnets, and
Hmm.
we would string a line between them, paracord between them, and then we used that to hook our rigs onto the bottom of the ship so we could return and grab them.
Yeah.
And the guy, and of course, the person on the left and the right flank who were bringing these magnets along had a pretty important job. And one, the guy, I'll just call him Q, the guy on the right flank with us who had this job was a pretty senior enlisted, B6, been in the teams for a while. At any rate, so he goes to, apparently, and I'm the officer. I ditch my rig and I hook it up. And of course, you're underwater. You're not giving instructions to anybody, right? You're just all praying that everyone's squared away and is going to make it to the surface at this point. So what happened to him is he goes and he lost his bearings. He kind of got a little bit of underwater confusion, which is easy to do. And he didn't hook his lip and mine up very well because it didn't hook up. Like it literally just ended up sinking to the bottom of the ocean, which took all the dive rigs with it. And it also took Rob Lasky, our chief, because he was all tangled up in it.
Good night.
I know, exactly. So we get to the surface and immediately do a head count. I'm like, we're missing somebody. And this guy Q had no idea what he had done. He was clueless. And so we're like, holy shit, we're missing. So, we call to stop this evolution and we start like free diving down at the bottom of the bay, and it's like 50, 60 feet deep. And we're like, crap, we couldn't find him. And the clock is just ticking. Like 4 minutes go by. And I'm thinking, man, I just killed Rob, or at least, I was in charge when Chief Lasky died. How's that story going to go? And suddenly I'm just kind of like sitting there wondering what the hell to do next. And I see this hand break the surface and then Rob's head, and he's just like calmly blowing and going. And he gets to the surface. He goes, "Hey, Cy, I'm fine. Don't worry about me."
I feel fine.
I feel fine. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
story, he was down at the bottom of the bay and he just calmly said, okay, assess the situation. I'm down here. I got trapped in this tangle in this thing. So he found, searched his body, decided what he needed to do, found his dive knife, started cutting himself out. And this guy had lungs of steel, obviously.
Oh,
Super
man.
calm. That's the power of the training,
Yeah, I think that brings to light the importance of pool comp,
Right.
whereas, you get tumbled about and they, tie your regulator hose into knots and disorient you as much as possible. And you've got to unsort yourself
Right.
through all of this and then do a free ascent to the surface. So
And it
obviously,
takes minutes. It took me
yeah.
about 6 minutes, and you have to find a little bit of air coming out of the regulator,
Mhm.
and they tie that master knot into it. I had to use my
Yeah.
foot to try to pull it apart.
All you need is just a little bit of air. Yeah.
Just a little bit of air, and that gives you another 30 seconds, and you get a little bit more air, and you kind of get it into your mouth and swallow it into your lungs. That training, you're right, and it's a great metaphor, is any type of training that can desensitize you to the fear that accrues from an unknown situation, right? And so if you're going to dive, then it's really important for you to be in a controlled environment and to get confused underwater.
Mhm.
To understand, wait a minute, if I just calm down and assess the situation, right, and make sure that I have a source of air, right, then I can clear my mask, and then I can, step 1, step 2, step 3. But if you just think you're going to go dive and be a hero, and you do a ship dive or something at night, and you haven't desensitized and figured out what to do when shit goes wrong, that's where people get killed.
Yeah.
The SEALs, they apply that principle in every single thing: parachute diving, demolition, shooting. Interesting. Okay, so you went to SEAL Team 3, is that right?
I did.
Your first
Yep.
tour. That's where I met you. You were there a few years before me. I think you were just finishing up a platoon commander tour. So
Yeah,
tell us,
we'd just gotten back from Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
did you do the oil rigs, or what was tell us about Desert Storm?
Well, Desert Storm, we were assigned, we did an ARG platoon, which is the amphibious readiness group. So we were attached to, an amphibious squadron and embarked with Marines.
Right.
And our job was, the boat patrols and, beach preparation. That's what we trained for before we went over. And
Mhm.
the big issue was under very shallow water, underwater mines.
Mhm.
And so we spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico learning some state of the art equipment for that era for finding and detecting bottom mines. So that's what we deployed to do. As it was, General Schwarzkopf decided to do an overland attack, and the amphibious group was used as a decoy.
Mhm.
I'm sure you remember, Tommy Dietz.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, were you part of that? His
I wasn't. No,
Yeah, he
no.
was a
Tommy
different one.
Dietz was on a sister ship. He was part of that ARG, I
Got it.
believe. But
That's a great story. So as I recall, and you can tell me if this is true or not, but they were commissioned with creating a diversionary tactic where, to make the Hussein's forces think that we were doing an amphibious landing at this particular site. And so the SEALs brought in a bunch of haversacks of C4, and the Navy ships bombarded the beach, and the SEALs blew shit up. But the interesting thing that I love about that, and I actually wrote a little bit about this, is the water was so hot and there were a lot of sharks around that they were like, we can't possibly swim in this C4. And so they sent a request back. One of the junior guys who was from SoCal was like, hey, let's use boogie boards.
mhm.
And so they sent a request back to HQ and said, hey, we need a bunch of blacked out boogie boards sent over. And some old enlisted Vietnam guy like blew his stack. He's like, what the bleep are those guys doing over there? We're supposed to be fighting an effing war, and they want boogie boards.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually deployed with boogie boards.
Oh, you did?
Spray
Okay,
painted them flat black, and had them in the Connex boxes to haul gear with.
To haul gear. That's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's fast forward. UDT, the old UDT missions, some people think this kind of ho-hum. I did one of those ARGs, and it's really interesting and really important work, and it might be important now with, kind of us repositioning toward state on state type warfare. If we do amphibious landings again, like when I was at 3, I did one of those tours, 2 of my tours in the Far East. I'm sure you might have done it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to do the reconnaissance of the beaches, for a landing in Korea,
Mm-hmm.
which was kind of important work. But so beyond that, what was your experience with the war on terror as a SEAL?
After 9/11,
Yeah,
I was in a twilight tour and had already put in a request to retire. So I did not deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan.
you didn't. Okay.
No.
So
My twilight tour was a reserve management tour. My wife, while we were in Hawaii, she went to law school. And so, after some heartfelt conversations, it was time for me to transition out at 20 years, take the retirement. And then it was her turn to have a career.
Right.
She's done really well. She did 2 federal clerkships and is working for a major company here in Oklahoma City now as in-house counsel.
That's great. That's really balanced. I love to hear you say that. It's important to give the wives who serve the men, especially for a 20-year career.
Yeah.
Support them. So did you become like, do you have any kids, or?
We've got 2.
Did
and
you Mr. Mom for a while?
I wasn't really Mr. Mom, but they were older. She was the stay-at-home mom while I was playing Navy SEAL. And then, the older son had graduated from high school while Tony, was in law school. And then, we had the little one who was doing really, really well in sports. And it was important to not be moving so much. So
Right.
during the time I was in the Navy, we moved 12 times.
Unbelievable.
And Tony never lets me forget that. But I did the reserve management tour, and we stayed put, and he was able to start and finish at the same high school. And he went on to play college baseball. So that was the right move for him, for sure.
Right. Before we get into kind of what happened after your military career, leading as an officer in the SEALs, and especially as you get more senior, is very different than, leading a boat crew at Buds. So what were some of the biggest challenges and insights from a leadership perspective or from a teaming perspective that you've kind of gleaned from your overarching SEAL career as an officer?
That's a really good question. And I think, the biggest, takeaway is in the surface Navy, the shipboard Navy, there is a very, very rigid, chain of command, very rigid. And while you listen to input, from your senior enlisted, um, it's not a shared responsibility. And what I saw and what I learned in naval special warfare, and this was a bit of a transition for me, is it's okay, if the enlisted guys call you LT. Not okay aboard a ship, but it's okay to have much more of a camaraderie, much more of a friendship, much more of a bonding that's really kind of looked down upon, in the surface Navy, at least my experience. You've got the officers' wardroom and you've got the enlisted mess decks where officers and enlisted take their meals. But
Mm-hmm.
in the SEAL teams, everybody's breaking an MRE, and you share meals together. You
Mm-hmm.
spend time together. You go on liberty together, and it's a much tighter knit group. And I just relished in it, and I really really enjoyed it. But trusting your enlisted folks, knowing that they've got your back, and having the confidence, to turn the leadership over or turn the decision over if the situation warrants it. The
Mm-hmm.
buck stops with the officer, no doubt. Praise, you share praise downward, and
Mm-hmm.
responsibility for when things go wrong upward. And I think that's that's a leadership style that certainly Simon Sinek writes about in his book Leaders Eat Last.
Mm-hmm.
Because that just drips and exudes, kind of the military leadership ethic,
Right.
as I saw it in naval
Right.
special warfare.
Yeah, what I love about what you just said and kind of what's coming to me now is that there are certain characteristics or attributes or principles that um, make for great leadership across all domains. And then there's certain things that are really specific to different domains or unique to different domains. And so, for instance, what you're describing is small unit naval special warfare, where there's a lot of autonomy, there's a lot of trust placed down, all the way to the lowest, the person closest to the sound of gunfire. All the officers / leaders are expected to, as we mentioned earlier at Buds, lead from the front and have competency across
Mm-hmm.
all the basic skills, so they can understand, so they can support the mission as a shooter as well, or an operator as well as an administrator or a coordinator. But if you cross over and you're talking about leading an Army, Ranger regiment, those principles start to kind of not apply as much, and they have their own style that works for them, right? But there's certain things, like I said, that will cross the board. You got to have a vision, you got to have a strong set of values, right? You got to be able to communicate effectively and whatnot. But then in the Army Rangers, like, they're a little bit more top down, and the enlisted, are going to be much more expecting to receive orders, as opposed to in the SEALs figuring it out on the fly, right? Because they may not have time, or those orders might never come. I'm reminded of examples of different SEAL leaders I've had on my podcast, and it always comes out that anytime they're in a joint operation, especially guys who are like DevGru working with Rangers, for an example, the DevGru guy, is just sitting there watching his platoon, kind of like, and saying nothing, right? But being prepared if he sees something that's out of whack to insert, his guidance or to provide some support. Whereas, his Ranger counterpart, the major or the lieutenant colonel, is like directing every movement of his guys in the field. And how the Ranger would look at the SEAL and be like, how come you're not leading? And the SEAL would look at the Ranger and say, how come you're micromanaging the shit out of this thing?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? I don't know.
I think at least I think in the conventional forces, whether they be Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines, there's a standard operating procedure for everything.
Right.
And what I learned in naval special warfare is there is no normal situation. So you can't have an SOP for every single thing. And that's where the, you know, the collaborative problem solving, you know, comes into effect. You know,
I think
everybody-
that's why the SEAL, you know, spec ops type leadership is so valuable right now for everybody in the world, or at least for everybody who's dealing with the VUCA, you know, corporations who are undergoing great change, everyone, government's undergoing great change. So it's a mindset that we developed that happens to be particularly valuable now and probably in the foreseeable future.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think I need to do a solo cast on that. That's coming up next. So let's talk about, you got your PhD and you got it in like spec ops, low intensity conflict, right? And what does University of Oklahoma know about that? Like, why did you get it there?
Well, it was home. So, you know, when we came back home, and Tony did a clerkship for Judge Backrack. And it was my original plan. I retired and I spent a year, you know, as a contractor working for the Joint Special Operations University.
Right.
And I thought that was going to kind of be my trajectory. And I saw that, you know, folks that had a PhD, something beyond the master's degree, were making a whole lot more money. So I had the GI Bill, and my thinking was, you know what, I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to knock out the PhD, which is an arrogant statement in and of itself.
No,
Oklahoma was, you know, the major university that was close. And so I started on that trajectory. Okay. With the idea that I would go back, you know, to work for the government in some capacity, back to JSAL. Right. That was the original plan.
JSAL is a great place. So what kind of took you off course?
Well, I think education changes people, and I became aware, you know, in naval special warfare, you're surrounded by, you know, elite individuals, physically elite, mentally elite. They're always willing to roll up their sleeves. And I think I became aware, you know, being in the military, that military bubble where you've got base housing, you've got healthcare, you know, you've got base DOD schools, you know, for your kids. And I became aware for the first time that, you know, the rest of America is not necessarily like that. And so, you know, there was a lot of individuals, you know, young people joining Teach for America. What the hell is Teach for America? And so I learned a little bit about its mission, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, here are these young people willing to jump into the buzzsaw that is, you know, the problem with inner city and public education and the achievement gap. And here I am drawing a full retirement. I'm secure. I've got a wife who's an attorney. This is something that I should do. I should be willing to roll up my sleeves and help solve this national problem. And you know, so after a lot of talking with Tony, my wife, we decided that we could do that. And so I applied for Teach for America, and got accepted, and went off to Institute, which is their version of boot camp. It's about 2 months long, and I was starting to turn gray at the temples already. I was in my 40s, surrounded by all these very young, very idealistic individuals, and Teach for America said, "Okay, where would you like to go?" And being the Navy guy, I said, well, wherever the greatest need is. And so, okay, great. We're going to send you to New Orleans, Louisiana. It was 2009, right after Hurricane Katrina in 2010. So the city was still rebuilding. Wow. And what would you like to teach? Wherever the greatest need is. And so I wound up special education at an alternative school, which is where the student population has been disengaged from employment and education due to incarceration, due to teen pregnancy, for any number of reasons. Some had been disengaged, you know, for, you know, 2 or 3 years after Hurricane Katrina. They just didn't go back to school. And so I did that for 3 years, and then spent a year with the Department of Education, the state of Louisiana's Department of Education, working the truancy issue. and then moved to DC with Teach for America's national staff. So I spent a total of 5 years with Teach for America,
Right.
if you include the classroom time, and
Right.
then the 3 years in the classroom, 1 year with the State Department of Education, and then 1 year as director of the Veterans Outreach Initiative. With the idea of trying to recruit veterans
Right.
to help solve this problem in public education.
That's terrific. So that's what led you to then kind of shift toward veterans education through the Warrior Project, I imagine.
Right. So Warrior Scholar Project was looking for a new executive director. I received a phone call. Somebody said you should check this out. And the phone call was actually from Chris Marvin, who at the time was the head of Got Your Six, which is a veterans advocacy group, or was. And so I applied and got hired and spent 4 years, back in the Beltway doing that, inside the Beltway. And Warrior Scholar Project is an academic boot camp for enlisted veterans who want to use the GI Bill and go back to school. And basically, it helps these individuals raise the bar in their own mind of what they can accomplish, so that they don't have to settle for a school like the University of Phoenix, and they can they can apply to Yale and Harvard.
So you prep them both academically, also with support to know what colleges to go for, how to apply to college, that type of stuff.
Yeah, so it started out at Yale and expanded to Harvard, and then by the time I left, we were at 17 campuses.
Nice. Well, that's interesting. Before we started the podcast, you said, and this was a surprise to me, that 200,000 veterans are transitioning out did you say every year?
Every year, every month.
Every month?
Yeah, according to the Pentagon.
That doesn't even seem possible.
Yeah, that's that's the numbers based on the latest report, which is from 2018. But 200,000 a month. And you've got these individuals that are coming back into society with a tremendous amount of attributes, that have been honed during military service.
Right.
Team builders, they've got leadership skills, they've got technical skills. They're adaptable, they're diverse, they're able to make decisions under stressful conditions. And so you've got an ideal civic asset, right there. And a lot of folks struggle with the transition out of military service to come back into society. And we've got, fortunately, a lot of really strong veteran service organizations that help with that transition.
That's relatively new, though, right? Because when you and I transitioned, it was very little. I think they had one program.
Right. So the military program is TAPS, or Transition Assistance Program, which is still, I would argue, not all it could be.
Right.
There's been a lot of work to try to improve that, but you've got a lot of veterans nonprofits out there.
Yeah, they've popped up for the last 10 years. Honor Foundation is what kind of comes to me. That's a neat group that started with SEALs to help them. Sort of like the Warrior Scholar Project, but to gear them toward a job, a really good job, a business job. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe Musselman, visionary, great guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I should do a podcast with Joe. He's a neat guy, and he's now moved on, and I think the Honor Foundation has expanded to include, all vets, or maybe all spec ops are starting there. Anyway, so, but a lot of the vets transitioning have seen a lot of combat. We were talking about how 20 years of Afghanistan and Iraq literally meant that there's literally 3 generations of people who've experienced combat. There's the young, Army, Marine, Air Force, or Navy enlisted or officer, who might have done a tour or two and then gotten out, and they're like 26 or 27. Then there's the mid-career, person who, maybe does 3 or 4 tours over there, who's 40 years old. And then there's the person who's in their late 50s or early 60s transitioning out as a senior officer or senior enlisted. So you literally have everywhere from 20 to 60-year-old military vets having experienced, sustained combat in very confusing and dangerous world. And so part of the issue with these 200,000 folks transitioning every month is post-traumatic stress.
Yeah,
so
and
not just
interesting.
positioning for, for careers and for college, but also healing, which is why the Courage Foundation, we started that. And I think about those numbers, like how like we've got to really expand that mission to be able to help a lot more folks.
And interestingly, you don't have to have been in combat to suffer from post-traumatic stress. I mean, there's a well-known study, Charles Fritz, 1961, actually determined that people in the rear that hadn't seen combat, and current surveys reflect this, that they're actually more likely to suffer from PTS than
Really?
frontline units. And why is that? It's because crisis and adversity increases the bonding and increases resilience. That's that's what the numbers are telling us. And so even though not every unit is engaged in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, many of those who are in the service are going to come home and transition out with PTS.
That's amazing. And now we're also learning more about the micro trauma that could lead to long-term issues for brain health and anxiety and depressive, issues just from shooting at the range or being involved in demolitions, or, if you're on a ship and the big guns are going off, right? And the helicopters and the jets landing. And so they're doing a lot more studies in it, and I've talked to some doctors who work with spec ops, and they say that they don't think there's a single special operator who doesn't suffer from some form of TBI.
Interesting.
Injury. Yeah. And so, I took that on board and ended up getting some of the services of the Brain Treatment Center here in San Diego, just to make sure, because they said they may not, for high performers like you and I, it doesn't really show up until, right, maybe when you're in your 80s, and then suddenly the cumulative effect of that TBI starts to wreak havoc. And you certainly saw that obviously with football players, professional football players, right? They're getting massive TBI, and if it's untreated, then you got these guys in their 60s with dementia, which is just really sad.
That's really good to know, because I know I spent way too much time at the range without my hearing protection.
Right. Yeah, something to pay attention to. If you're a vet listening to this,
spongy ones.
Yeah, I remember that. It was woefully inadequate.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, and we'll end here soon, but talk a little bit about your vision and mission, now at the Courage Foundation, and, what you hope to see, what your vision for the future is, both for vets and, for this country. That's
I'm
broad statement, but
first of all, very honored to have joined the Courage Foundation team and the Unbeatable Mind team. I just, that whole mantra of master yourself and serve others that you and I have talked about, that is the, kind of the bumper sticker of what Unbeatable Mind is all about. And I'm just thrilled to be part of the serve others piece of that. But, that right now we're focused on veterans because we're not very big. And we're going to have a lot of veterans that need support. But the vision, going forward, is I would like to see Courage Foundation grow to include first responders. I mean, if you think about our Vietnam generation of veterans that came home and weren't really appreciated, slurs called baby killers, hated, looked down upon because they had been drafted and had gone to Vietnam and served. And then a lot of that rhetoric, I would argue, hovers around our police officers today, and there's nothing like having a job, a difficult job, and not feeling like you're appreciated by those that you're working to serve. That's tough. Some of our teachers, it's the same sort of thing in these really, really tough schools. They just don't feel appreciated. And I think that manifests itself in the fact that most teachers in public education leave the profession before they hit the 5-year mark.
Really?
So there's a lot of room that and there's a lot of good, I think, that the Courage Foundation can do going forward and growing and getting bigger and serving more people.
I agree. Yeah, my original vision was more expansive, but then it was difficult to kind of raise money for some of the issues. You know, I was wanted
Hmm.
to support some of the prison population
Yeah.
and help them heal and find purpose again, and also battered women. But yeah, so we ended up collapsing it to really veteran issues to kind of get a foothold and to
Yeah.
make a difference at least in one place. You know, kind of focus precedes success, right? So
Yeah, I
we
mean,
were
you're
focused.
driven by resources, so I think
That's right.
that was, absolutely the right call.
Right.
Focus on veterans nowadays. Not the case during the Vietnam years, but
Mhm.
nowadays, everybody appreciates military veterans.
Yeah. You know, I think I'd like to end with a question I often ask people. You know, when you listen to the news and you talk to people, it seems to be kind of a gloomy, very pessimistic outlook on the world and where our country is going and, how things look like. People think that, we're basically going to be consumed with, global warming or, jihad's going to sweep across or we're all going to end up, as communists. It's like, what is your view of the future? What's your vision?
Well, it's a positive vision,
Mhm.
but I think it's a couple of things. I think as humans, we're naturally prone to cognitive dissonance. In other words, we like to hear things that we agree with,
Mhm.
and to uh, piggyback on Robert Putnam's work, Bowling, in his book Bowling Alone. We don't interact as well anymore. His book Bowling Alone basically is the bowling leagues have fallen apart, and that's where
Mhm.
people interacted socially,
Mhm.
and shared stories, and it was easier to disagree but remain friends.
Mhm.
um, and nowadays, with social media and people being much more isolated, it's easy to only listen or only seek out the point of view that you agree with, and I think that only adds to the disparity, in viewpoints and the polarization, that we
Mhm.
have in this country. But I'm an optimist. I don't think that we're Rome. I don't think we're falling apart, and I don't think that America is doomed or that the world is doomed. I think
Mhm.
I think people are strong, people are resilient, and we'll get past some of this.
Right.
And I think too, um, Watergate taught our press that the sensational story is the one that sells, and so you've got to uncover the big scandal.
Right.
And so a lot of journalists are running around looking for a scandal and
That's
then
right.
blowing it up real big, and then that just gets people that much more agitated.
Yeah, and it's led to kind of a jaded approach toward media, and even I fell into that. Like, I don't trust anything coming out of mainstream media anymore. I call it opposite day. I try to look at what the story is, and then I think, well, what's the exact opposite? And I said that's probably closer to the truth.
Yeah, or just go outside and look around and
Right. Oh, I just spent 7 days in Wyoming just staring at the most incredible landscape. Just
yeah.
stunning, and that was like reading the positive newspaper, hanging out with the horses and the ranch hands. I'm with you. I'm optimistic about the future. I'm super stoked to have had this conversation, Sid. I really appreciate it. Where can people learn more about your work with the Courage Foundation or anything else you want to share?
Well, we've got a major campaign we're working on, and we'll be rolling it out. It's Burpees for Vets,
Nice.
and
That
it,
sends shivers up my spine, by the way, because we ended up doing 120,000 burpees in
we're
2019.
we're bringing that back to life.
Just dusting off the burpee.
And we're going to collaborate with other veteran service organizations, and it'll be a month-long campaign. And we've got some great connections that we're making with the NFL,
Nice.
with large organizations as well as veteran service organizations. So we're hoping it'll be very successful. The idea is, you do the burpees and challenge three friends and make a small donation and challenge three friends. And we're hoping that it gains the same momentum that the Ice Bucket Challenge did
Sweet.
and gets more people involved.
That's coming up in October,
It'll be
November,
November, the
November,
month of November.
straddling Veterans Day.
Yeah.
Terrific. And so is it still the burpeesforvets.com website or? that you want people to go to learn about this, or where would they learn more?
Well, we're going to tweak and launch the website, but yeah, it'll be burpeesforvets.com, and the hashtag is hashtag burpeesforvets.
Right.
But the idea is to bring together nonprofit organizations that serve veterans in the physical fitness realm, in the mental health realm, and then just in general transition. So your education facing veterans nonprofits, right, and the like.
And if a listener is part of an organization like that, or wants to donate or learn more, how would they connect with you?
It would be Sid at Feed Courage, Feed Your Courage Wolf, at feedcourage.org.
Feedcourage.org.
Or you can send me a text message. My cell phone is area code 504-281-0479. But I'd love to hear from you and connect with you and set up a Zoom call.
Awesome. Awesome, Sid. Well, thanks again for your service, both in the military and now serving our vets at the Courage Foundation. And I appreciate you. And insights on leadership are invaluable. So
thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. And I've really enjoyed this past hour.
Yeah, appreciate it. Me too.
Take care.
All right, folks. That was retired Commander Sid Ellington, Dr. Sid. Although, Sid, I'm going back to get my doctorate, and I'm not doing it because I want people to call me doctor. And I notice you don't lead with that either. Like, you don't like it, probably.
Well, as soon as I got that sheepskin, I put it on my LinkedIn page, but it's way down now.
It's down below.
It's not the leading headline.
Do it for the education, not for the title. Well, I appreciate you. All right, folks, that's it. So check out the Courage Foundation at feedcourage.org. Send Sid an email if you want to connect with him at sid@feedcourage.org. Or he was bold enough to put his cell phone out there, so go ahead and send him a text message. And thanks again for your support. You can check out our work at Unbeatable Mind at unbeatablemindcom. We have a phenomenal new 30-day course, which is a great way to get introduced to our principles. That's unbeatablemindcom/challenge. Check that out. And until next time, stay focused and be unbeatable. This is Mark Devine. Out here. Hoo-yah.